Hello and welcome to the official Alex Trebek tribute channel on YouTube, Zilog and Moto, where I think the best way that we can honor the Canadian, sometimes mustachioed legend of the game show circuit is by reviewing mediocre video games from 30 years ago that feature his smug, clearly smarter than you persona. And just to prove it, I've actually previously reviewed Jeopardy on the Genesis twice, back in episodes 34 and 133 respectively. Well, actually, to be clear, I technically reviewed Jeopardy and then Jeopardy Deluxe Edition in those episodes. I didn't actually review the same game twice, as that would be silly. It just felt like it. And I'm pretty certain that if you did a deep dive on the code that's used in both of those games, you would find some legitimacy to me saying that, besides just being able to use my eyes and ears to know that I was playing the same damn game, just with different questions. However, I should probably pause for a second because I'm sure that there are some of you out there that don't know me and just got randomly dropped here due to searching for highlights from Alex's previous gig on High Rollers. And just as an aside, if you really want to see DJAF Alex at his best, go watch the final episode of High Rollers with Alex. I'll link it in the description below. It's pretty hilarious for a 45-year-old episode of a syndicated game show. Hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where I'm not actually dedicated to paying tribute to the greatest Canadian game show host of all time, sorry Monty Hall and Howie Mandel. I'm actually instead out to collect and review not just video games that have just possibly been copied and pasted to one another by a developer that should really know better, but also the nearly 1,280 other titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. Now, there was a lot to unpack in that previous paragraph, but don't worry, I'll go over all of it further in the video. I mean, I've got to have something to talk about to fill out a review of a video game that I've already covered twice. I suppose briefly, for those of you out there that aren't from North America and are wondering what the hell it is I'm babbling about, I should mention that Jeopardy is a quiz-based game show that originally dates back to 1964, with the Alex Trebek hosted version that today's game is based on starting its run in 1984, that largely had most of its run teamed back-to-back with Wheel of Fortune. As far as today's game goes, in all honesty, I'm hopeful that maybe, just maybe, there have actually been some changes that separate this game from the previous efforts. But seeing as how it was released only a month after its precursor in Jeopardy Deluxe Edition, with Deluxe coming out full 30 years ago in April of 1994 and Sports Edition that following May, that hope is probably going to be very short-lived. But hey, that's why I do the reviews. You never know what you're going to run into. A strange situation like I found last week with the Sega CD version of FIFA apparently using a different color palette than the Genesis version. So let's get into it, and I'll see if I can uncover anything interesting here, or if this is truly just an instance of Game Tech trying to squeeze all the dollars they can out of their paid license. But first, a look at the multi-ball adorned package. Okay, and this is my copy of Jeopardy Sports Edition for the Genesis. Fun fact, for some reason, when I bought this copy, it came packaged in one of those Mylar protective bags that you see people use for retro games, when they're too cheap to go for the firm box protectors. And simply because it came in that bag, I've kept it on there this entire time. But honestly, I'm not sure if I can think of a game less deserving of any kind of protection than this one. I suppose it's nice that it's kept the dust off of it all this time, but currently complete copies of Jeopardy Sports Edition go for well under $10 a pop on price charting, and this isn't even a good condition copy, at least on the outside. I mean, just take a look. The outside of the front cover is scratched all to hell, and there's various dings and other gouges all over the box. Now, I'm definitely not replacing this copy because I simply don't care about it enough, and the inner contents are actually in good shape, as you'll see in a minute. As far as the front cover art goes, this is fine. I mean, I'm not exactly expecting a whole lot from a Jeopardy game. Although I guess to note, this is the first one that did not use the same picture of the Jeopardy studio, just with a slightly different picture of Alex superimposed. The art, consisting of all different types of balls and other sporting implements, definitely gets across the theme of sports edition, and I like the little details like the turf at the bottom of the picture and the fact that the reflection in the lower portion of the Jeopardy logo has that green tint to it from said turf. Also, you're probably not surprised to know that there were no international editions of Jeopardy Sports Edition, just like there were no international editions of any of the 4 Jeopardy titles, including the Sega CD version that I'll review in a future episode, and as a result, there's no other cover art to compare this to. Flipping over the back, and the rear cover matches the format of Jeopardy Deluxe Edition exactly, with the only difference being the flavor text and the pictures chosen to run down the right-hand side. The pictures are all of decent quality, and actually slightly allay my fears of this just being another carbon copy of the previous 2 releases, because if you look closely, you can see that the player characters have all been changed to some type of athlete. It's minor, but hey, I'll take what I can get. The last picture is somewhat unfortunate, as it shows off one of the questions from the game, where the answer is, who is Payne Stewart? And if you're not aware, the reason why this is unfortunate is because 5 years later, in 1999, Stewart would die at the early age of 42 due to a plane accident, with the chartered flight not pressurizing correctly and the plane only crashing due to running out of fuel as it was stuck on autopilot with everyone unconscious. Now, of course, with this being a 30-year-old title, I'm sure that there's going to be lots of questions that are included that are going to reference people that are now deceased, but I've got a feeling most of them don't involve players who died in their prime in completely preventable accidents. Opening up the package, and you'll see what I mean about the contents of the box being in good shape and the warranty reply card included, with really just a bend at the top portion of the spine of the manual. As far as the manual is concerned, it's more or less the same manual as what was provided for Jeopardy Deluxe Edition, and this really just serves to explain how to play Jeopardy if you happen to have never seen the television show before. So, in other words, it's not really needed if you're familiar with Jeopardy at all, and the only thing I find mildly interesting about it is that apparently you got a free month of CompuServe with the purchase of the game from GameTech. Just call up representative number 436, and they'll hook you up with not just a free month, but also a $5 usage credit. Wow, the internet in 1994, what a different beast it was. Okay, that's the package. Let's get to the game and see if there's anything at all interesting here. You know, when I do these reviews, I always go into them hoping that they're good games, no matter what they are. Even when I did the review of Compton's Interactive Encyclopedia, I was hoping that maybe there would be something about the release that was somehow interesting or noteworthy. And really, if I didn't have that mindset, I don't think some of these reviews would get done. And conversely, I think that's why you see some of the games getting reviewed over and over again on the internet. Well, that and the fact that those more popular games with name recognition tend to get more views. But even with that take, hey, this is Jeopardy we're talking about, one of the most popular game shows of all time. That's gotta be worth something to YouTube, right? Anyway, when I reviewed Jeopardy Deluxe Edition previously, I think I might have been the most disappointed in any game that I've reviewed so far in the past 233 episodes. Well, maybe not more disappointed than in Duke Nukem 3D, which is just a glorified tech demo, but I digress. The whole point is, I played Jeopardy Deluxe Edition hoping that Park Place Productions would have taken the 14 months between the release of Jeopardy and Jeopardy Deluxe and done something besides just include a different set of questions. I mean, keep in mind, Park Place Productions was the studio behind John Madden Football, Joe Montana Football, and NHL Hockey, so clearly there was some talent in the building at that point. Now, a documentary about the downfall of Park Place Productions is definitely beyond my skill set and the scope of the video, but the short version is, unfortunately, by the time that Jeopardy Deluxe Edition was released, most of the actual talent was actually not in the building and had gone and moved on to Sony ImageSoft. Anyway, due to the substantial lack of talent that Park Place Productions was dealing with, Jeopardy Deluxe Edition was shockingly underwhelming, with other than a new set of 3,500 questions,
The only notable changes between the titles was that there was a new allotment of 5 player avatars to choose from, which admittedly were drawn slightly better than in the first game, but still nothing special. I also noticed a slight difference to how Alex Trebek was drawn, but you see him so rarely during gameplay that if I hadn't been struggling to come up with differences between the two games, it wouldn't have even been worth mentioning. With Deluxe Edition being the literal Merriam-Webster definition, or Oxford definition for those of you that probably have no business watching this video in the first place, of a rehash, why on earth did I have any hope for Sports Edition? Well, maybe because I'm an optimist? Or possibly just a moron. I mean, we are talking about someone who thinks it's a good idea to do a weekly YouTube series on 1,300 games designed for hardware that's the equivalent of a transistor radio in 2024, but I digress again. In all seriousness though, I looked at the back of the package when I was reviewing Deluxe Edition to compare the two releases, and I saw the screenshot of the updated sports themes avatars, and I thought that Game Tech and Park Place Productions couldn't possibly sell me the same game for a third time. I mean, could they? Well, here's where that moron excuse comes in, because as I know from reviewing Game Tech's American Gladiators back in episode 28, of course they would try to sell me the same game a third time, as they clearly don't value things like quality and effort. And if you haven't figured it out yet, yes, Jeopardy Sports Edition is largely the same game as the previous two, with the only real difference being a set of specifically sports-related question categories, and those new sports-themed character avatars. Everything else is the same. The same sets with the same podiums, the same fonts for the questions, the same control scheme with the game configuration intro, even the exact same title screen, which is again just the same shot of the Jeopardy studio with the logo front and center. This was a huge point of contention and clear laziness to me about Deluxe Edition, and I mean really, they could draw new avatars but not add Deluxe anywhere on the title screen. And now of course Sports Edition has the same title screen again. And you know, for the original game in Deluxe, I could kind of understand why the title screen didn't change, but for Sports Edition, surely that should be noted somewhere. But no, it's not even mentioned on the copyright screen that flashes afterwards. Since you know now that Sports Edition is largely the same game as Deluxe Edition and Regular Edition, if you watched either of those reviews, you probably already know what I'm going to discuss, so you'd be forgiven for skipping ahead or noping out early. But for those of you that missed those videos or that just want to stick around to see what else I complain about, let's get into a little detail about what you're getting with Jeopardy Sports Edition. As you might expect from the title of the game, Jeopardy Sports Edition is a port of the popular show on your Genesis console. And that's about it. I mean, seriously, there's not really any extras here, and certainly no options other than the ability to choose between 1, 2, or 3 players. If you choose to have 2 players, you have the option of excluding the computer and just playing a one-on-one game, or possibly playing in single-player mode and then choosing only to play against 1 computer opponent instead of 2, but I don't know, both of those options just seem strange to me, as Jeopardy has always been a 3-competitor game, and that's part of the fun, is that by having 3 players, you're less likely to run into a situation where one player is clearly smarter than the other and then just runs away with things. Traditionally anyway, of course on the show sometimes there's one player that's head and shoulders above the other 2. If you're not familiar with the show, regardless of however many players you've chosen, the game consists of 2 rounds, named Jeopardy and Double Jeopardy, and then a final question called, Final Jeopardy. Each round has 30 questions divided into 6 categories with 5 levels of difficulty in each category, with the higher the difficulty, the higher the dollar value of the question. And before any Jeopardy nerds out there have a fit, let me clarify, when I say questions in Jeopardy terms, it's technically an answer, with your job being to provide the question that matches the answer given by the host. For instance, if Alex provides an answer of, this baseball team once played its home in the Polo Grounds, the proper response would be the question, who are the New York Mets? In all honesty, it's just a gimmick to try to make the show different from other quiz games, but it worked, and plenty of players have made blunders by giving a response that's technically correct, but getting it wrong because they blurted it out without putting it in the form of a question, and having another player come behind them and steal it just by adding what is or who is or something like that. All of this is replicated in the game, and while it's probably not the greatest technical achievement in the world, especially now being the third time around, no one can say that Jeopardy Sports Edition doesn't provide a proper virtual version of the game show. You might wonder how players are supposed to give their responses, since the genesis is of course sans keyboard, and that's done by moving a cursor back and forth to spell out the answers one letter at a time. It might sound painful at first, but it actually works pretty well, other than the occasional weird pause that occurs when trying to scroll left or right. You get used to it, and it's really not that big a deal, but I do wonder what bug causes that, and how the hell they managed to not fix it twice. Just as an aside, the same issue occurs when scrolling left or right to choose your player avatar, so it's got to be something weird about how the controller input was programmed, but since you only run into that at the beginning of the games, it's less noticeable, but still definitely annoying. Thankfully, to help out players, the developers put the kibosh on having to answer in the form of a question, and correct responses are just the subject of the question, with no having to type in what is or who is or anything like that. And for questions involving teams or players, you're only required to type in the team name or the player's last name, further simplifying the input process so that players can spend more time actually playing the game. You can still input the whole name for either if you want, but it's not necessary, although the computer will usually show off and do so, assuming they have the correct response, which many times they don't. But even though the computer tends to not be the sharpest tool in the shed, they can still be competitive if you aren't careful, due to the catch of Jeopardy being that if you don't respond correctly, you end up losing however many dollars the question is worth. So sometimes discretion is the better part of valor rather than risking losing money. And to be honest, I found the answers in Jeopardy Sports Edition to sometimes be somewhat difficult, even for someone who, at least I think, has a pretty good knowledge of sports outside of cricket, which, as far as I'm concerned, might as well be played with Calvin ball rules. This difficulty is amplified when playing the game in 2024 because while some of the questions might have seemed to be contemporary knowledge in 1994, now they might as well be ancient history. For instance, one of the answers I ran into when playing the game was the seemingly simple, "This team plays in the Delta Center." Well, I happen to know this because I've watched the NBA since the late 80s, but the response they were going for, "What is the Utah Jazz?" wasn't accurate from 2006 to 2023, as Delta Airlines didn't have the naming rights for the building for that time period. There's other times when I ran into phrasing issues with names in the game as well, and while none of these situations that had the computer being technically wrong, it did throw off the flow of the game. One was a question that was asking what NBA team did Lou Alcindor start out playing for? Well, being a Lakers fan, I knew of course that they were talking about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and while yes, when Kareem technically started out in the league, he was still publicly known by his former name, even though he had already started going by Kareem himself. He hadn't been known as Lou Alcindor for well over 20 years, so it seemed odd and almost disrespectful to put the question that way. Similarly, I ran into one situation where I provided a technically correct response in Muhammad Ali in What Boxer Threw the Phantom Punch. However, the computer denied it and instead only accepted Cassius Clay. In this instance, not only had Muhammad Ali not gone by Cassius Clay for 30 years at that point, it's technically wrong, as the Phantom Punch occurred in the second Ali versus Sonny Liston fight, which took place after Ali had changed his name. I'm not sure how many other issues like this are present in the game's reportedly 3,500 questions and answers, but the fact that I ran into two in just the short time that I played the game isn't a great sign, especially due to the TV show's normally high standards for accuracy. One nice thing about the game is that before each round starts, you're given 6 categories that are picked at random, and if some of the categories appear are ones that you've played before, or if you simply want a different set, you can hit the C button before the round starts to try again for a different assortment. It's a small touch and certainly not a new feature, but it's still nice to have and is definitely good for extending the life of the game, because there's nothing more boring than playing a quiz game where you already know all the answers. Questions. Graphically, as mentioned, nothing has changed other than the 5-player avatars that you can choose. Not that much really needed to change, and if you're playing a Jeopardy game, you're probably already accepting the fact that it's not going to be a graphical powerhouse. Still, it would have been nice if there had been some tweaks here and there. I mean, come on, I know that I already complained about it, but they didn't even change the title screen. I mean, how lazy can you get? The avatars are okay, although I have to ask, why only 5? Were they unable to modify the underlying code to add in support for more? Well, all I can say is I hope you like tennis, because out of all the sports in the world, they decided it would be a good idea to make 2 of the 5 avatars tennis players. I know Park Place Productions was on the verge of closure, but damn. From a sound perspective, even less has changed from the previous games. And by even less, I mean nothing. The same music themes, the same intro, the same very few voice samples of Alex Trebek. It's the exact same content from the previous 2 titles. I can't complain about what's included, as the themes and voice samples are of good quality, but clearly the lack of effort stands out. And as much as I want to ding Jeopardy Sports Edition for being lazy and uninspired, at the end of the day, the game does do what it sets out to do, and that's provide an up to 3-player home version of Jeopardy, except with the caveat of having questions and answers based exclusively on sports categories. Now, could they have done more with the graphics and sound, or maybe, added support for Sega's Team Player adapter so that you could actually use 3 separate controllers rather than have 2 people have to share a controller in a 3-player game? I mean, it sounds reasonable, right? But unfortunately, that's not what we got. As a result, I'm giving Jeopardy Sports Edition 2 stars, just like Jeopardy and Jeopardy Deluxe Edition before it. There's no new ground covered here, but if all you're interested in is a sports-based trivia game, you might want to check this out.
Okay, and that is it for Jeopardy Sports Edition. 3 down, 1 to go. Thankfully, when I finally get around to the Jeopardy for Sega CD, that should be a different and hopefully better experience, as the franchise finally gets away from Game Tech and instead moves to Sony ImageSoft and developer Absolute Entertainment. And what do you know? It apparently supports the Team Player adapter. It's almost like that was a no-brainer decision that should have been included in the previous games. Next time on Zilog and Moto, I'm actually not sure what I'll be uploading. I've got a trip coming up this weekend which will involve visiting the Midwest Gaming Classic up in Milwaukee on Saturday, and then possibly another visit to the Pinball Palace in Brunswick, Georgia, which is a must-visit if you like pinball and are ever in the area. This year I'm not presenting at MGC due to all the travel. Well, that and I didn't get asked to this year, but let's focus on the travel aspect. Having said that, I haven't decided if the next upload will be based around the trip, the convention, and maybe some pickups, or if it'll be review number 235. But either way, I'll figure out something, and I will try to let everyone know on the socials next week. Well, that is it for Zilog and Moto episode 234. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.